Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Court-Martail Podcast. Introducing your host for this evening first. He is the host with the most from the West Coast, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. And his partner, he has colonized, energized, and revolutionized the podcasting wrestling world today. Your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty. And welcome one and all once again to another exciting edition of the Court-Martail Podcast. I am your Colonial champion, Sean McCarty, here on the Go Home edition. And I hope you are all sitting at home, but no matter where you're watching this, whether it's on your phone, whether it's on your tablet, whether you're lying in bed, just waking up in the morning, or going right to sleep, you know that we are going to be here for you, giving you everything you could possibly want in a pro wrestling podcast. And with me, as always, the man of the hour, the man with the power, too sweet to be sour, the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. Hello, sir.
Is Goldberg WWE champion yet?
Couple days. Just a couple days, and your wish will be granted. I know you're so excited.
No, I'm not.
Come on, Sky, what's there not to be excited about? It's a 54-year-old man who called the entire...
Who injures other people? Who injures other people?
Nia Jax. Nia Jax injures other people. Oh, you mean like Goldberg, who also injures? Yeah, I hope, for God's sakes, please do not hurt Drew McIntyre. He's the best thing you've got on that show, WWE. But in any event, we're going to, because we are getting ready for the Rumble, as always, we are going to have our Rumble review next week. So stay tuned for that. And we may or may not have Josh again join us. We will see how the ball rolls with that respect. But because we're getting into Rumble season, we're approaching, in this very interesting time, a near a year when everything started shutting down. So for our topic this week, I wanted to pose a hypothetical to you, Sky. Everyone else, all the different sports, when the pandemic first started here in the States, the NFL shut down. It's like, we're done with this season. The NBA is like, we're not doing our season. We had, I think it was a Thursday when just everything shut down. Do you remember that Thursday, Sky?
I remember watching sports, and I was like, this could be the last day that I've been watching sports for a long time.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it was Wednesday night, and I was like, better enjoy this while I can. And the following Thursday, like, nope, everything's gone.
Yeah, and it was stunning. But the only thing that didn't, because, you know, WWE is great with schmoozing with the government of Florida, the only thing that was declared an essential business was professional wrestling for whatever reason. And so WWE steamrolled on with their performance, no matter what the safety precautions were. And they, of course, got very heavily criticized for it. But because we are looking at now, and because 2020 was the year it was as far as the pro wrestling world is concerned, and we got what we got, good, bad, and the downright horrific, I wanted to pose this hypothetical. With where everybody was at the time of the first outbreak of COVID, where WWE storylines were, what do you think WWE could have done if during that couple weeks in March, let's say like the 13th of March or whatever it was, let's say that for all intents and purposes, WWE decided that they too were going to cancel their season and pick it up later in the year, let's say for 6 months or a year. What could they have done in their stead, instead of giving us the program they had gotten, both in what they could have done for what shows they would air, but also what they could have done for storylines? And I've given you a couple days to think about this, guy, so I'm going to let you start with some possibilities.
I think the ultimate answer is that they couldn't stop, because their TV contracts and their NBC and Fox overlords demanded that they continue wrestling and the health of the wrestlers and the referees and all the backstage crew.
Yeah. Well, and it's...
Now,
yep.
I mean, if they what they really should have done was have WrestleMania 36 be the season's ending, and after that they should have just stopped. Then they could have just gone back into their tape library and play a bunch of matches, classic matches from yesteryear, and that would have worked fine. That's what a lot of the other sports did, is that they played classic games.
Yeah. And maybe WWE was concerned that their classic matches would end up drawing more viewership than anything they're doing now, which is probably true if they started putting on, Attitude Era episodes or, Ruthless Aggression Monday Night Raws.
They'd have to be very careful, though, because they would get in a lot of trouble because TV ratings have changed a lot since those days.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, they would have to. Well, hell, they could put on old WCW if they really wanted to. They could throw the territories on and really confuse people.
Just imagine turning into Monday Night Raw and you see Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and then you go to SmackDown and you watch old NWA clips.
That'd be something. I mean, well, personally, it would be a dream come true if they just decided, because of NBC, they just decided one day, like, you know what, we're just going to give you on free TV, let's show Starrcade 87 again. And I'd be like, I'd be down. If I was scrolling across television, which nobody does anymore anyway, but which is the point I want to bring up next, but if I was scrolling around and I saw Starrcade 87 just casually, I'd be popping that on in a heartbeat. But it's interesting because with the way that people watch or don't watch pro wrestling now, they had the network. So they had the tape library where it's not like they were going to lose that much money if they didn't air those pieces, especially with the ratings across the board declining for sports of all varieties.
I mean, that is true, but the fact of the matter is that they saw an opportunity, and that opportunity was to be the live sports option. A lot of people, myself included, it's hard to watch something when you already know the result, so you don't have the emotional attachment of what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Because once spoilers come out, they come out, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. No.
Especially with a business like pro wrestling where it's so crucial to have the genie in the bottle.
Exactly. So I don't know what they... Now, granted, I think they were kind of forced to have to continue doing shows in order to maintain their standing.
Yeah.
If they had gone on hiatus, there's a good chance they would lose a portion of the audience that would never come back. Having said that, they definitely could have done it better.
Oh, yeah, well, without a doubt. And, the one thing that I will not fault WWE for in this entire time, especially with 2020, is for trying new things. Even though I don't care for anything that they did, I'm going to knock them for trying, for what they were, the concepts that they're pushing. Because there was some redeeming qualities about, like, the Boneyard match. And if it wasn't, and that's actually the only cinematic match that I actually can allude to that make that kind of reference to. It's not like all the ideas were bad. The execution.
Right, like it was a novelty idea to have wrestling with no crowds in the PC.
Right. But here's also the problem with that. Because WWE, as a result, got the decision to continue to run the shows, exposed WWE for just how contrived it really is, because the fans, at the very least, even though we all knew that it's predetermined and yada yada, at least the fans being there still bring life into the show and still make it feel sometimes like it's organic moments, like Edge returning at the Rumble, which was huge and made feel huge, and nobody saw that coming, and that was a great moment in WWE, let alone how great that Rumble as a whole was. But when that
you'll never be able to capture that magic in a vacuum with no people around.
Exactly. Well, that's just it. And no amount of Kevin Dunn magic is going to salvage that notion. And really, it's hard because you're looking at the ratings now, and would it have been much different if they had just waited? I mean, they've lost, maybe 500,000 viewers? Maybe more in the past year or so?
It's not only that, but they went to great expense to create the Thunderdome, which arguably makes the show worse, not better.
Yeah.
And that's not a pretty penny to set that thing up and then move it.
At the expense of several wrestling personnel's contracts and several people backstage. We, of course, can't forget the Purge. And at this time, which is the most confusing thing, because WWE, probably when we say they could have made money running the reruns on this, they had to sell the XFL because of the pandemic, did Vince McMahon.
Well, yes, but I think that was more of a... Okay. If we want to be honest with Vince McMahon, he has so much money, he could afford to have kept the XFL around.
Sure.
And that's the same thing with the wrestlers that he purged. He could have kept the wrestlers that he purged, but he wanted to keep the bottom line positive. And I'm not going to fault a businessman for making a decision, but I will fault him for making a decision that hurt more people that he didn't have to hurt.
Well, especially considering, let alone the wrestling part of it. How many people were employed for those 8 cities or 10 cities that had XFL teams on it? There was a lot of staff that all of a sudden just didn't have a job. You know, and not to say the XFL's ratings were going to bring them an immediate profit, but there was potential there. Potential that I think
there was a lot of fun with the XFL, which wasn't existing in the National Football League. And
could argue still isn't. You know, they're really, unfortunately, you know, obviously my bias is my bias considering who's in the Super Bowl this year, but the truth is, football, in a lot of ways, could use a facelift of another promotion with a couple different variations on the rules. And what I liked about the XFL is that they were really starting to do that. Within reason.
Right. Right, within reason. But we're talking about football, and that's for when we do our sports podcast.
Well, that's true, and we will have to do one of those eventually where we just talk hockey and sports. But I guess the bottom line of that is there was a lot of financial dealings that forced WWE's hand, I think, in a lot of ways. But you think that how much more attention they could have put in if you would cut out, okay, there's no pressure to put a weekly show on every week. For 6 months, let's sit and think about these stories and where we could take these things and how we can get from point A to point B. I think we end up having a much better Lesnar and McIntyre match out of it. We probably would not have had to suffer through Goldberg and Strowman because Goldberg and Roman Reigns would probably have had their moment, which you could argue would not have helped Roman at all because Roman's heel turn has saved his career in the eyes of many fans.
You wouldn't have to watch the Braun Strowman Bray Wyatt feud that ran in the summer.
Oh,
you wouldn't
God.
have any of the cinematic matches.
Yeah.
Now, I have another hypothetical, a quick one I want to throw to you.
Yeah.
Now, WWE has a tape library of over 30 to 40 years of professional wrestling, but AEW didn't have that. They've only been a promotion that's been around for a year, so you wouldn't be able to do anything, especially with a promotion that's trying to establish itself in the pro wrestling mainstream.
True.
Do you think they would have survived this pandemic if they stopped shows?
I think that they would probably have been all right, just given the fact that Tony could easily have paid them all. And honestly, just kind of narrowing around with the theoretical there, because if Vince shut down and Tony didn't, that would have bolstered AEW a little bit. And honestly, I think that would have helped WWE as well if AEW had continued to establish itself and get somewhere up, you know, light a fire under WWE a little bit. But I see what you're saying as far as not having the legacy to fall back on with AEW. And I think that they would probably do all right because they have enough of a tape library, and honestly, they could show episodes of Dark, and every match of theirs goes 108 minutes long, so they'd only have to show 2 matches a week. You know,
you'd have to wait 3 months to watch a women's match.
Yeah,
all the men's matches go 30 minutes.
Seriously, Sky, just with the YouTube stuff alone, just with AEW Dark, they have enough to do another year's worth of programming without doing another taping. So,
but those are all squash matches.
Hey, it'd be something.
Yeah.
I mean, they could honestly do that and then filter in every so often another match, or you could have it where you only have a couple people do a couple matches at a time. And instead of doing full-fledged shows, you know, you can do some episodes of Dark, but here's the match that they did this week. I always thought that both of these companies could have done something where maybe you don't have a whole show involved. Like you just do a couple show, you add some clips or highlights or do some older show that you could put on, and then at the very end you could do something modern and just reduce the schedule of people in a modern way and do it like a half and half situation or even a different ratio, but still being able to use main modern 2020 pro wrestling but with a reduced staff.
If only there were two booking geniuses who came up with a monthly wrestling show every third week of the month who actually knew how to standardize their shows and ratio them properly.
You know what, Skylar? That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If only there had been two men brave enough to face the perilous waters of professional wrestling booking in 2020 and not make the show look like an absolute group of clowns or amateurs. But thankfully, from the thickets of the YouTube podcasting world came two men. One of whom is a host, one of whom is a co-host, one of whom brawls in the Bay Area, and one of whom sits and watches wrestling matches in his dungeon. And these two men have created ACPW and NWL, Atlantic Coast Pro Wrestling and the National Wrestling League, where you can see how we would do things. In the Ultimate Fantasy Booking, we have just started our Season 2. Stay tuned for that. We had one last week that we redrafted our rosters. And of course, in the middle of February, we're going to launch our very first shows of Season 2. So stay tuned, and you know how to do it. You got to like, you got to share, you got to subscribe, and you've got to make sure that you throw that bell button over the top rope. Make sure both of its feet hit the floor, and you switch it to all. So you can get all of that all at once for all of your Court-Martail podcast news. And wait a second, Sky. I just said the magic word. You know what time it is. I know what time it is. Roll the intro, baby. Coming straight to you from the Golden Gate Garage. This is the Wrestle News with Skylar Green.
That is right. It is the weekly wrestling news with the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg, at your service.
Welcome.
And Sean, we have a lot to cover.
All right, let's hear it. What do we got?
So we're going to go to the wrestling company that does not die, Impact Wrestling.
Yes, they are still a thing.
They are still a thing, and Impact is still doing LLTNA things. Now, Ethan Page, or the Karate Man, if you will.
No, I won't. I won't.
Had a match against himself on Hard to Kill. And this match was so upsetting to him that he quit the promotion. Now, I'm not going to read the statement that he put out because it's a long statement and it's a little cumbersome and he kind of rambles for a little bit. But let me just give you the gist of it.
Yeah.
So the Karate Man was a gimmick that he created on YouTube as a little comedy thing, you know, get ratings and viewings and whatever. And Impact thought, hey, why don't we put the Karate Man on TV? And Ethan Page was like, sure, why not? It'll help cross-promote. And I don't know, maybe it'll get my followers to raise the viewing numbers of Impact. But then they booked it weirdly with Ethan Page fighting himself in a cinematic match with terrible production values that looked like a high schooler took it on a camcorder. And Ethan Page was so upset at this that he quit because he didn't like what they were doing and he didn't approve of the actions after he quit when they edited it to make him look worse than he already looked. Now, you have a very interesting opinion on this, Sean. May you?
I do. And because we talked about this beforehand, to me, I don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for Ethan Page. And I'll explain why. Because if you didn't want your name and your legacy and your reputation to be tarnished, because his main argument, because I've heard the clip, the main argument that he's making is that what Impact did was hurt his name and hurt his reputation as a wrestler because he was fighting himself, and the way they booked it, I guess he was supposed to book it where he was gonna kill himself, and
basically, and it ended with a Mortal Kombat finish of the Karate Man holding Ethan Page's heart.
Yeah. So it was. If I understand being insulted by that by a professional wrestling sense, however, if you were that upset with it, you wouldn't have gone along with it to begin with. If you really cared about your image as a pro wrestler, why would you ever agree to wrestle a match against something that doesn't exist? I know it's a gimmick. I understand that, but it's at this point, I don't think Ethan Page has the position to play high ground and play the moral high horse here, because he went along with it to begin with.
If you were saying you would not consent to doing something so stupid in the first place.
Yeah, if you really cared, which is something that is not taught nowadays, which is baffles me, is how with so many agents in the right place, how nobody teaches modern day wrestlers how to protect their image and how to protect their aura and their esteem as a wrestler. And that's why people do so much stupid, goofy stuff, like the guy taking the thong out and putting the baby oil on him, and stuffing the thong in the guy's face, or the AEW match from the pre-show of I want to say it was Fighter Fest between, I think it was that dude and Alex Jabali, where they went out into a pool area and there was a kiddie pool, and one of the guys used a inflatable pink flamingo to deal irreparable damage, and the guy sold it like he had just got hit in the head with a sledgehammer.
Don't forget turkey legs and ninjas.
Oh yes. We can't forget WWE's fantastic use of the War Raiders in that match. But here, the point being is that I don't think Ethan Page can say anything because Impact's video quality was bad, because you agreed to the concept. And if you didn't agree to the concept and then they botched that and they botched your image, yes, you have an argument. But you don't get to be an accomplice into a burglary and then turn everybody else in and say that your hands are clean. That's just not how it works.
That is true. That is very true. Now, Ethan Page has interest from NWL and WWE and AEW. He's a good hand, and I think he can go and help any promotion. I would have kept him with his tag team. I don't know why they put him up.
Me too. And I think something you mentioned the last time, Skylar, was that the difficulty is Impact. I'm sure that Ethan was trying in some way to be a company man and go along with it to try to make things work there. But if he was going to leave anyway, what difference did it make between him doing this and then him saying, no, screw you guys, I'm not going to fight myself, I'm going to go work elsewhere, which was already the plan to begin with?
Well, we'll see what happens with Ethan Page, but this was not a good look for him.
No, well, it's not a good look for anybody.
But speaking of things that don't look good, let's move to All Elite Wrestling, shall we?
Oh, boy. There are a lot of things that aren't pretty on that show.
Now, they have moved their AEW next pay-per-view from February 27th to March 7th, which is Revolution.
Right.
And we only have 2 matches confirmed. One is the Young Bucks defending their titles against a mystery opponent. And did you hear what happened on the latest Dynamite on January 27th?
No, I did not.
The Bucks want to wrestle against the Good Brothers, and they're going to enter the Battle Royal for next week's Dynamite that's supposed to determine the number 1 contender. And if they win, they plan on challenging the Good Brothers.
So wait, so they as the champions are entering the Battle Royal to face the champions. And
face the champions of another promotion, simultaneously shitting on every other tag team in AEW by saying, no, we want to fight these guys from another company.
Well, because, again, this is all just a little tiny, 10 people are in a circle jacking off all on Don Callis' sunglasses, and this is what we get out of that. And
like, what sense does it make to have the Young Bucks and the Good Brothers wrestling each other? They're both heels.
Because they're friends. Oh, well, Sky, Tony Khan has not cared about heels and baby faces at all in his booking time. I mean, we had the Dark Order fighting Eddie Kingston's guys, fighting Pac's guys. I'm pretty sure Lance Archer and Eddie Kingston are still fighting each other. The Inner Circle has done nothing but fight.
Yes, but Lance Archer is a face now, which is weird.
I don't understand. The Inner Circle. Explain the Inner Circle, how they've all been fighting against each other, but no, they're all heels and they're the most united faction all around, and all 6 guys together can come around, and they still won't fit around Jericho's waist. And it's just heels and baby. Chris, you're an easy target, especially because you're so wide. So
Yeah.
sorry, I really like that one. It's so mean. But anyway, and
okay.
what's the other match?
He'll just drink an orange mimosa and he'll be fine.
That's right.
Anyways, so the other match is Darby Allin and Sting versus Team Taz, Brian Cage, and Ricky Starks, and that's going to be a train wreck.
If you think for 1 second that Sting's going to take more than half a bump in this match, you are sorely mistaken. Because Darby Allin is going to destroy himself.
But there's actually a good chance he'll take more of a bump than next week's tag match of Cody Rhodes and Red Velvet versus Jade Cargill and Shaq.
Speaking of useless celebrity involvement, did you see Snoop Dogg's frog splash?
Oh, that was awful.
I love Snoop, but stick to rapping, buddy. You're good at many things. Professional wrestling is not one of them. And listen, I get it. I get it.
What is it with AEW and early 90s pop stars?
They're all on TNT. They got to get those contracts in eventually. I'm not going to watch that new talent show that Cody Rhodes is judging either.
That's going to be terrible. And
yes, it will.
What the hell? Cody Rhodes versus Shaq?
Well,
like,
I don't know. Remember when they cared?
O'Neal.
Remember when they said this show was going to be tag teams are going to be a feature, and they're going to be important, and they're going to matter. Where we at now, AEW? Where we at now?
How did it start, and where is it at right now?
How did we get here?
Okay, we're gonna leave the land of elite wrestling.
Thank God.
And we're gonna go to Sanford, Connecticut.
Oh, great!
Have you? Yes, one hole to another hole. So, did you hear the Undertaker's comments on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast?
I did. I actually liked most of the podcast, but I'm assuming you're referring to where he called the wrestlers soft.
Yes, and how he pines for the days when men were men, and when you walked into a locker room, you would see cranky old men with guns and knives, and you would not mess with anyone. And now when he walks in the locker room, everyone's playing video games and making sure they look pretty.
And did you hear now recently, just to kind of add a rider onto this, did you hear Goldberg's echoing of The Undertaker's most recent statements?
I did, but from my sense, Goldberg's seems to be more kayfabe. Because he's trying to work it in a storyline that he, as a legend, feels disrespected by the younger generation.
Well, I think that's probably a bit of a worked shoot, at least from what I read from Goldberg's recording. You know, when he was saying that to Drew, which was dumb because that didn't make any sense because they botched the whole setup of that. But Goldberg basically was like, I was actually talking to most of the locker room and actually probably most of the fans. When you consider how much people don't want Goldberg around, that's got to be traumatizing.
How is Goldberg not the heel?
Vince McMahon.
I think they know at this point that Goldberg sucks, so they're trying to turn it heel, but it's still not going to work.
They don't care. I don't think they've even thought past this. I think they were like, Goldberg used to be money. I like money. Goldberg equals money. Here. And
have $1 million.
Yeah, I think that's probably where the line
stops. $2 million.
Yeah.
Have $3 million. We're getting it all from Saudi Arabia anyways.
One per concussion you give out.
Yes. But speaking of the man he concussed, The Undertaker's comments, how do you feel about it?
Here's my thing, right? I'm going to play devil's advocate here because this is one of those situations where I understand what Undertaker was trying to say, but because of the upbringing he had in the wrestling business, which if you listen to the rest of the Joe Rogan podcast, The Undertaker went through some shit to break into the wrestling business, went through a lot of shit to break into the wrestling business. And I think that that's part of why his statements are such, was that the wrestling business in the locker rooms in the 80s when he was breaking in, there were some pretty toxic plays. I mean, if you were taking a spot from somebody, your bag was getting shit in, you were getting your bags padlocked, you'd be left at the airport, someone will drive away, you're getting ribbed constantly, and the ribs were, depending on which territory you're in, were borderline hazing, if not worse than hazing.
And there was even murder that happened in the locker rooms.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I think because the idea of what masculinity is now in 2021 has changed so drastically from then, and how it manifested itself at the time. Undertaker is part of that generation that then projects that trauma onto modern day masculinity, almost as if to say, how come they're not suffering to get what they've earned the way that I suffered to get what I earned? And that bothers people.
And the answer to that question is that as things move along and as societies progress, it should be easier for further generations. And I think that's just something that The Undertaker doesn't understand. Now, granted, I understand The Undertaker's point of view. He's a product of his time, and he's not necessarily saying that he misses it, but he feels like he doesn't connect with the current generation. And that's true. I just hate that he went with the lazy narratives of guys trying to look pretty or trying to play video games. First off, video games have been around for 30 years, so you're not on any high horse that's special, Undertaker.
Well,
and second, with looking pretty, you're in the wrestling business. It's about looking good most of the time. There are some guys who look ugly, but they make money.
Mick Foley. Mick Foley. I love Mick.
Who's that one guy? Oh, I can't remember his name. He was in WWE, but he looked like shit, but he was champion.
There's a lot of them.
No, but I'm trying to think. It was in the 80s. Shit.
Couldn't have been Pedro.
No, it wasn't Pedro. No, it was the Warrior. Yeah, it was the Ultimate Warrior.
Oh, jeez. Wow. What a runaround. What a runaround. But it's true, though.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, I think that what I gleaned from Undertaker's point, too, is in the back, is I don't see the kind of thirst for success and that hunger and that grit that leads people to success and looking like badasses. Let's say for a handful of people, like Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre and things like that. I think that overall, the look of the locker room has changed just because it's become so much more high-octane gymnastics-based as opposed to what it used to be. And that alone provides a bit of a disconnect. And I don't blame Taker for saying that there's a lack of grit, because gymnastics have taken over for that grit in professional wrestling. That's just a fact, with a handful of exceptions. But I think that the blame for why it's that way, Undertaker pulled a 50-year-old Texan. The attitude, which was just, I think you're right. Lazy excuses is a good way to put it. Because I think that the blame is misplaced.
I feel like Undertaker, if he had worded it better, probably would have gotten a more positive reaction from the current locker room. Because a lot of the locker room leaders like Kofi Kingston and Drew McIntyre and Xavier Woods have spoken out against what Undertaker said. So it's fallen on deaf ears.
Yeah, well, and that's a problem industry-wide, is people not understanding what the point of what people are trying to say is, especially people older in the business. But, I don't think that I think Undertaker didn't mean anything malicious by it. I don't think that was the point. But I get Undertaker's point, because you and I both testify to this, guy. Sometimes it's hard to watch modern wrestling. More often than not.
It's not just hard to watch modern wrestling, but it all looks the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think we need to go back to stabbing each other in the back of the locker room to achieve what he's aiming for. But I think just by the trauma of the association of same, that's what led to the way that statement was phrased.
Exactly. And we'll see what happens. And hopefully, I feel like the locker room of the business is going to change in the next few years. I'm not sure how it's going to change, I don't know if it's going to go even more softer or if it's going to get tougher.
Well,
let's not question these guys, okay? These are some tough guys to be in wrestling. It's not an easy job.
Well, and by the time that you've gotten to WWE, I think that for the most part, you've earned that durability cred, because WWE's schedule is absolutely insane. I mean, for anybody. You know, it doesn't matter what you look like or how you do it. It's an insane schedule. And
yep. And speaking of things that will change the schedule,
yes,
let's talk about what NBC Universal Group has done. Now, there are two major things that are happening with NBC. The first one is that they're pulling the plug on their national sports broadcasting program, which hosts their NHL games, horse racing, golf, the English Premier League. And the important thing about this is that they're shifting all of their live sports broadcasting to USA Network. Now, the reason why that's important is because that the NHL in particular likes to run their primetime games on Wednesday nights, and NXT's contract ends with USA Network in October. And it's very possible that the NHL will take over NXT's spot, and NXT will either move to a different night or to a different network altogether.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, it probably moves to a different network or moves to a different night.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised if both happens, actually. That they probably won't leave NBC, because I think that this precedent that this sets, not only with the shifting, but of course the second half of this news, which is the $1 billion purchase of the tape library that NBC just made to stream on Peacock,
which is NBC's streaming program to rival that of Netflix, HBO Max, and Disney Plus.
Which will now shut down the network after a long time. So if you want WrestleMania, folks, you heard it from here. Well, not first, but you heard it from here. Now is the time to research and invest in Peacock, because you won't be able to get Mania on the network this year without it.
Now, for the Peacock users, it's $4.99 with ads, $9.99 without. And what interests me is the fact that with Peacock in particular, it's going to open the broadcast, because the WWE Network is niche. Only WWE fans are going to look it up.
Yeah.
But if you put live programming on Peacock, you have the possibility of getting viewers who may not be wrestling fans, but may be bored, and they're just like, hey, this is wrestling. Let's check it out. Let's see what it's like.
Yeah, and then they'll look at it, vomit, and turn it back off and go watch The Office. And
which is why, if WWE wants to be successful, they had better change their fucking product.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is, it's interesting because it sets two very similar but different precedents. Because the first precedent it sets is that WWE is not afraid to sell anything of theirs at this point, which is something that you'd think that the McMahons are going to own WWE forever. This tells me that there is at least a thought of getting rid of it and having NBC buy it altogether, which I think is, a slippery slope. It starts with the tape library, and it moves on from there. But
especially with the rumor I have heard in the recent days that NBC is looking to buy SmackDown's rights from Fox.
Right. Yeah, which would then make them basically the only game in town when it came to wrestling, unless Fox started backing the AEW train. But
no,
I don't see that happening.
No,
I don't see that happening.
No, it's not going to happen.
But what's more interesting, and the second precedent this sets, is that this is an opportunity for WWE to really expand their viewership in a way that they thought they were with the network. And this is going to be very interesting to see how they progress from here, because it's really sink or swim. Because if you've got more people that have access to your product and nobody cares, what else do you got left?
You already sold your soul to the devil, so what else do you have to give?
Yeah. And it's, but at the same time, if they do sell everything, that means no more Vince McMahon. Theoretically.
Oh, please. Yes. Speak the truth, Sean.
So,
hallelujah.
Well, I think the bottom line of this is because this is so groundbreaking as far as what it could potentially lead to between NXT and them finally not admitting they lost the war, but kind of subvertly admitting that they lost the war. between AEW and NXT. Between that, they've got a lot of products that they can revamp here. The bottom line is pro wrestling is going to look a hell of a lot different in the next 5 years than it has probably in the last 20, just from the actions of this week alone.
And it will be interesting to watch and see what happens, especially with top stars from NXT like Finn Balor and stars from the main roster like Seth Rollins. And just think what those two guys could have done in matches that they have with each other.
Yeah. And one last little teaser here before we move on to our next segment here, because I had whispers of this, and there's been whispers around, and with the thing with backstage. Do you think he's gonna come back, or do you think he's just messing with people? For those of you who don't know who I'm talking about, it is the guy who they've asked every year if this guy's gonna come back, and the answer has been a resounding no for the past 7 years. But this year, Sky, anything could happen.
Never say never. Never say never.
Even Moxley had just recently had an interview where he said he'd be open to thinking about a return to WWE, which tells me just what you need to know about AEW.
I'll never leave. I'll retire in AEW 6 months later. I'll be thinking about going back to
I'll think
WWE.
about it. Yeah, I'll think about it. Yeah, exactly. But we'll have to see what pro wrestling looks like. But at this time, speaking of groundbreaking changes, it's time for the second half of the show, which means it is our favorite segment where we review matches. Let's go. You know what it is. I know what it is. Roll that intro.
What time is it? It's the fight, it's the brawl, it's the match of the week. It's tonight, watch along with the son of a beat. It's one fall, the down for the 1, 2, and 3. So don't stall, hang on to the edge of your seat. We got a punch and a flip and a powerbomb too. All the moves and the stars are all under review. See the baby face cheered and the heels get heat. This is wrestling at its peak. It's the match of the week.
That's right, folks. It is your match of the week. Now, we did do on the live stream, we did 2 different match of the weeks this week because I did 2 different live streams. We did a bonus one of the Royal Rumble 2000 and the one we're going to talk about today, the debut of the everybody's favorite candy-colored championship, the Universal Championship. It is the debut match, SummerSlam 2016, the Demon King, Finn Balor, versus Seth Rollins before either of them became absolutely insufferable. This match, notorious for several different reasons, the least of which being the injury to Finn Balor, the most of which being that this would lead to arguably the worst wrestling belt ever created and the lineage of the worst wrestling belt ever created, and this really started to set the tone. What did you think about this match, Sky?
Everything that is wrong with the Universal title was encapsulated in one match.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So let me lay down some context for this match, if you will, please.
Yes, please do.
So this was SummerSlam 2016, and this was the 12th of 13 matches on a 5 or 6 hour card.
Burnout.
And the fans never recovered from the classic match between AJ Styles and John Cena.
Nope.
So by the time we got here, the crowd was just dead. They were on their hands, and they could not get into this match, especially because the belt looked awful.
And they didn't. That's all they did was chant about this belt. That was their only thing. They basically took the piss out of the entire match, which was underwhelming itself, by the way. But most of the match was just the fans chanting how bad the belt looked. And that's one of those times when I like the fact that fans are not in the building. When fans do that, it makes me embarrassed to be a fan.
Yes, but I could understand it because they were not happy with what was going on in the ring, and I do not blame them. For example, what the hell is the Demon King?
The Demon King is a guy who tore up his mom's Naugahyde leather couch and decided to weave it together into a headdress, and decided as well that while he's wearing his tennis shoes, to also paint his entire body because he's quite a good artist, and then go out there and do nothing but drop kicks, big running drop kicks, and double stomps the entire match.
And just think about this, folks. That story, that idea of a character that Sean just created was better than what WWE actually gave us. Because what WWE gave us was, this is my dark side, and sometimes I let it out.
Dark side equals face paint. Face paint equals tough. I am face paint man. Yes.
When the Ultimate Warrior has better character development than you, it's time to walk away.
Well, he certainly had more energy in his promos, at least at this juncture. And you and I can both attest to this. The Balor of 2021 is not what this Balor of 2016 was.
No, this Balor was shallow.
Yeah.
Shallow as hell.
And it started off bad. First of all, I knew this match was not going to be good when it immediately started with a basement drop kick, hot start. 90 seconds in, we get a dive. I'm like, this is not going to be good. And
it just never flowed. I know these guys hadn't wrestled before, so I knew there wasn't going to be any sort of chemistry. But just watching, their styles do not match whatsoever. They're
too similar, I think. Because they both use the sling blade. They both do step-up ensiguris, which is another, the rope-assisted ensiguri. That's another move that absolutely everybody on the face of the earth does now. I could really not do with it. And really, the person I blame for that is Finn Balor. Finn Balor, to me, at this point in 2016, represented everything wrong with pro wrestling as far as the modern-day spot-heavy style. By smaller guys who don't do much else other than use their entire body weight to make it look like they're damaging people. A la Rio.
Well, you can even generalize it further in that Finn Balor is what's wrong with modern wrestlers. On the surface, he looks really good.
Yes.
And there's an undeniable aura and charisma with him. But once you get down into it, it's just smoke and mirrors. There's no substance behind him.
Yeah. And the Demon King was not enough of a personality for me to like him. And especially because of how much they ruined that by not bringing it out for Brock Lesnar, but then bring it out for Baron Corbin. Why?
And
we don't know either.
The half-assed reason of he brings it out when he needs it.
Yeah, because Constable Corbin is definitely the hardest of the hard, but Brock Lesnar, Finn Balor can get no problem.
Exactly.
So then they get about 3-4 minutes into this match, and then we get the buckle bomb, the infamous buckle bomb. And for God's sake, Sky, if that was not Finn's fault.
That was Finn's fault.
That was 100% Finn.
Now, Rollins, he could have gotten him higher, but Balor, do not put your arm behind your back. Just let your back hit the back.
Yeah.
Hit the barricade. Not that it's a great move, and I don't like it because it looks too awkward, but there are better ways to take it than literally putting your arm behind your back and contorting it.
Well, I think Seth also got a bad rep, too, because that, the Bret Harts of the world blame that on Seth, and I'm like, that is not on Seth. That was how it was. It's like when Yoshi Tatsu got crippled from a Styles Clash, and Yoshi openly admits, I messed up how to take it. I think...
Well, this was also at a time when the previous year before, Seth Rollins had injured Sting and John Cena in a couple months span.
Yeah.
So this was souring a lot of people on Seth Rollins, when it wasn't really his fault.
No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. And, there were a couple things that still looked good in this match. And props to Finn for, still working through that with all the adrenaline running, still being able to work the match. They worked the leg, which is about as much psychology as we got in this match until Seth decided he wasn't going to sell it anymore.
I didn't know Seth Rollins became Triple H.
Well, that's why that match with Seth and Triple H always makes me laugh. Because it's like it's looking in a mirror. Only one does a lot more jumps.
Speaking of Triple H, that pedigree was awful. I'm sorry, Seth, but I'm glad you got rid of it.
I wish he had never taken it, honestly. I know they were trying to do that because they were kind of cautious on the stomp at that point. But I wish that they had not I don't like the idea of recycling finishes to begin with. You know, or at least the way that WWE does it, where they're very obviously like, oh, Dolph Ziggler, he's using Shawn Michaels' super kick, instead of, look at Dolph Ziggler's super kick. Look at Kevin Owens using the Stone Cold Stunner instead of Stunner.
I mean, the idea behind it was that Seth Rollins was mentored by Triple H. That would be fine if he did the move better.
Yeah, that's a part of it too. And it's like, and I liked the counter into the float over DDT. That package, I forget what that was called. That exploder package driver was awesome by Rollins, and I wish somebody would use that as an actual finish, because that's a move that I would put people away with.
Well, you're a professional wrestling promoter. You could give that move to someone.
That's right. But
don't give it to Orange Cassidy.
Oh God, no! I wouldn't dare. I would not dare. So they do this match. It's just blah, because there's no pace. Nobody cares. There's really no ups and downs to the match, because this is, again, just a modern spot fest match. And then they reminded me that this match was no disqualification. Only because we must have a winner. So they didn't do the rope break on whatever bad leg scissor Seth Rollins was doing at that particular moment. But here's my question to you, Sky. Why was this labeled no disqualification? I understand they did it because we have to have a winner. But then just don't have a disqualification finish. To me, I don't think it helps it being billed like that, because that assumes that you're going to use weapons and stuff. But that wasn't the point. And Seth, who was heel at this point but was about to turn babyface the next night, was not really doing anything heelish at all. So there was no referee luring, there was no, cheating, quote unquote, at any point. So what was the point of making this a no disqualification match, other than for looks?
For looks.
Oh, okay, all right. That's
about it. I mean, I can't come up with an explanation for the way that they booked things. This felt like a half-booked match.
Yeah.
It's like they said, okay, just go out there and wrestle a match. We're giving you the winner. We're giving you a couple of spots you do, but come up with everything else.
Yeah, which is fine. And those two, to me, this just did not have the oomph that it should have had. It didn't have the gravitas it shouldn't have had. And that's not even to mention, the injury or anything like that. It's just Balor, to me, at this stage, was incredibly underwhelming. And Seth Rollins was great, but he had just come off the leg injury, and he was still coming off a whole series of other things, too. So he didn't really have his momentum back either. So this was bad for both of these guys from the start, I think.
Agreed. This was not either of these man's best work, and thankfully they've gotten much better, especially Balor, because if Balor, he really needed, Rollins was still good, he was still there.
Yeah.
It just didn't work for him, but Balor, he really needed to save himself with his career, because this match was sunken.
Yeah, well, this match and then the subsequent way that they treated Finn Balor, which was basically, you're a really small guy who's got a good smile. And to be fair, he did connect with kids. He did have a connection with people, but they basically just used him as their PC pandering stick, which people saw right through, and it didn't work. And this is a great way to transition into our superstar spotlight, because we are going to talk about Finn Balor. And I guess we'll work backwards here, because now in NXT with his heel turn, and when he had that brief club reuniting, and now what he's doing as far as his feuds with Kyle O'Reilly, Finn Balor now I view him as a much more valuable commodity, because he's learned a lot about the subtleties that he was lacking at that time facing Seth Rollins.
Well, if you even go back to the beginning of his career, so Finn Balor has actually been wrestling for a long time, starting in 2000.
Yeah.
But he really got his big break in 2007 when he started wrestling for New Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was wrestling for New Japan, he was always recognized as a good wrestler, but the problem was that he was a white meat babyface.
Yep.
And that's fine. It will certainly get you a mid-card title here and there, but it's not going to get you the recognition of being one of the best guys.
Right.
And he could not make himself stand out on a New Japan roster that was pretty damn deep.
Yeah. Yeah, at that time in the early 2000s, that was really some of the best New Japan ever produced.
Exactly. And then he formed arguably the most famous stable currently in professional wrestling, the Bullet Club, along with Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows, and Bad Luck Fale. And he started tapping into his Prince Devet gimmick of, I'm better than you, and look at me, look how awesome I am. I'm so much better looking than every single one of you ugly losers. And that was what got him his first real push in New Japan.
Yep.
Is his cool but cocky, arrogant persona, which is really what made him, it got him to stardom.
Well, it's what grabbed WWE's attention to begin with. I mean, let alone the fact that he was able to do a lot more artistically with his body paint then, which I always loved. You know, back in the day, I didn't really know anything about him, but I would keep hearing Prince Devitt. This is Prince Devitt did that. Prince Devitt did this. And then you would see, like, on the Dirty Dirt sheets, you know, they'd have photos of his artwork, and it was just impressive. It was just like, wow, this guy, you know, without even seeing his work, you could tell just by his look that there was something to this guy. But
which is clear when Triple H and company decided to bring him into NXT.
Yeah.
And NXT in the mid-teens from 2014 to 2016, it was a loaded roster. It was a stacked roster.
Yeah.
Because you had Sami Zayn, you had Kevin Owens,
Yep.
you had Kenta, you had Adrian Neville, you had even Tyler Breeze in the mid-card, and Finn Balor, with hard work and dedication and a connection to the fans of NXT, became the face of that company for 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he was, in a lot of ways, the poster boy, the figurehead superstar that they needed at that time to really mold the identity, because they were cycling talent so frequently with NXT, which was great. I mean, we were seeing all new people, all different times, but there was never really much of a constant. And Finn Balor became that constant for NXT, which really was helpful when they launched and started getting really some of the big matches going through, and all the other talent started showcasing. And then when Finn left, you know, that torch got passed kind of onto the DIY portion, and then of course that led to the Undisputed Era kind of taking the face of NXT, and now it's kind of back to Balor. But that was a time when Finn Balor, part of why I don't fault him for not being impressive in that match in 2016 was that he had been built at that point, you know, prior to the 2 years with NXT, but he had been built in New Japan to be the long spot style, forcibly, you know, really lots of stomps and kicks format that New Japan likes. And so that being 3/4 of his arsenal, of course it was, because that's all he had to ever do. And it took a little while now, but I feel like with the way that WWE's format is, Balor has found a good blend of New Japan's strong style format and being able to still do the storytelling that more American audiences would appreciate and enjoy.
I think the only thing that you could say was detrimental to him and his run at NXT was that he never had to really change his character or moveset. And that's fine for NXT, but when you go to the main roster, you have to be able to have more than one dimension, which he just didn't have. And that's why his main roster run kind of sunk the way it did.
Yeah.
Is that he could connect the people, but once he got into the ring, he couldn't do anything to really grab them and make them remember him. Can you give me a main roster Finn Balor match you remember besides Brock Lesnar?
I remember his match with Bray Wyatt and hating it. Because the Demon came back. I think that was the year after. That was SummerSlam 2017, I think.
That was. It was. Well, no. That was 2019.
No, they had two.
2019.
They had two. Because the first match was before Bray Wyatt became the Fiend, but the Demon King came out to beat Bray Wyatt and basically say, "Hey, remember?" Oh no, I'm sorry, Bray Wyatt. No, he did not win that match. I thought Bray Wyatt won it. He did not win that match because Finn Balor won that match. Then the one in 2019. Then they did the switch.
Right, but again, you just had issues remembering that match because, well, I mean, it wasn't memorable. I remember he had good matches with Roman and AJ, but I can't name them off the top of my head where they happened.
The triple
And the only
threat.
notable one is
The triple threat at Mania
triple threat-
34 with Miz, Seth Rollins, and Finn Balor, I really liked.
But did Finn Balor not feel like the third wheel in that match?
Well, on paper, you'd think that The Miz would be the one most out of place, but I think the reason that I was sour on him was that was at a time when, like I mentioned, WWE decided to use Finn Balor as our PC pandering stick, where he was like, "Look at Finn Balor. Finn Balor is our politically correct guy. Now, don't mind us doing all our shady stuff back here. Look at Finn Balor.
Pay
Look how
attention to
progressive
the
he is."
LGBT Finn Balor and forget about the Saudi Arabian blood money.
Yeah, it was like, and again, I think that we mention it so often with WWE. 9 times out of 10, it's not the talent that's at fault. It's the way they're presented. It's WWE's presentation. I think that Finn had a bit to learn. That I think he learned from his failures on the main roster, which is why his NXT run now has been so much better. So I think that even though his career has already been long, he's still got a pretty bright future as far as what he'll be able to accomplish in WWE.
And that presentation is what matters, because when he came back to NXT and he heel turned, he became much more interesting than he ever was as a white meat babyface.
Yep.
And that has led to some fantastic matches against members of Kyle O'Reilly, Adam Cole, Tommaso Ciampa, Johnny Gargano.
Yep.
And there's a lot of potential with Finn Balor now. And if he was to return to the main roster, I think he would do much better than his first run.
It would depend on where they figured him in and who they figured him in with, but I'm inclined to agree. And who knows, we might see Finn Balor in the Rumble.
I wouldn't mind a Finn Balor Rumble appearance.
I wouldn't mind Finn Balor showing up. In fact, what would be really interesting is if, we'll close with this. What if out of nowhere, after losing the NXT Championship whenever he loses it, or even with it still, Finn Balor comes back and wins this Rumble? And goes
Who
on.
do you have him feet?
I think
Who do you have him wrestle against?
I think you got to have him wrestle Roman Reigns. I don't think, because Drew's too big for that to be feasible. Sorry. It's the truth.
Hold on. Finn Balor versus Goldberg.
Oh, Christ. Christ. You know what? If Goldberg would do the favors for Finn Balor, I'd be all for it. But you know he wouldn't.
Maybe, but Vince would probably have to force him to do it.
Vince, that would be... But we can dream, can't we? Oh, God.
Make your dreams come true.
Well, we'll find out this Sunday, but right now, we are now at the point where we have to take our first commercial break. Sky, thank you very much, as usual, for hopping on. I will see you after Goldberg has won his world championship and we can discuss the Rumble to our heart's content.
Joy.
Yes, joy to all of us. But until then, thank you very much for listening. That is the Bay Area Brawler, Skylar Greenberg. I am your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty. And